So I recently built this portable Bluetooth speaker out of this Lunchbox. And it was such a fun and easy project that I figured it might be fun to build another one. So I did. And in this video, I'm going to take you through step by step through how to build your own. If you're just getting into DIY and making your own things, this could be a good project to start with. The parts are really simple to source. The tools you need are probably some stuff you already have in your house. And you get a nice speaker at the end of the day when you're done. So let's get started. So here's an overview of all the parts I'll be using. Now again, all these are going to go inside of a Lunchbox just like this. So I went and bought all these parts on a website called Parts Express. It's a really simple way to get everything kind of that works together. Now you can of course go out and buy your own Bluetooth parts and speaker parts. I just found if you want to get moving really quickly, this was just a really simple way to start. So from the top left, we have the actual amp board itself, a battery pack that we could use to make this portable, a power switch that will go into the top of the case. This is the speaker cable that will solder to these two speakers and then plug directly into that board. There's a Bluetooth antenna here just for extended Bluetooth range. This is the volume knob, which will go to the front of the Lunchbox. This cable here basically is used to attach the battery to the Bluetooth board. This is a power cable that we use to solder to this particular power jack that will go in the back of the case. This is a 3.5-inch audio in jack that we could use if we want to plug in accessories and not use Bluetooth. These here are the LED lights that we'll use to go into the back of the case to indicate status. This is a Bluetooth reset switch. And then over here we have an assortment of screws. These are 8x32 screws that we'll use to attach these speakers to the front of the Lunchbox. And these are a series of M3 bolts that we'll use to attach the Bluetooth board and battery board to the inside of the box itself. So here's all the tools I'll be using for the project. We have a Phillips head screwdriver, a pencil and a Sharpie marker, and those are just used for drawing cuts or drawing the outlines for places I want to cut. We have an X-Acto knife for smaller, precise cuts, a utility knife, which we'll be using for scoring some of the larger plastic pieces later on, a jeweler's drill bit, which is super useful for drilling these pilot holes for things like screws and these ports, a wire stripper, which we'll use to strip the wires for the speaker to help with soldering, a soldering iron, some solder, and then these stepped drill bits. Now these are super useful for drilling out the ports in the back. Basically, find the diameter you want to drill to that depth, and you get perfect circles out of them. So it really becomes really useful for this type of work. And then the last thing we have here is basically a roll of masking tape. Now I'm using that not for the purpose you'd imagine. I'm actually using that because I don't have a large enough drill bit to drill out these speaker holes. I basically use this to draw out the diameter of the speaker because it just so happens to be the exact same size. And once I've drawn out the circle I need, I'm using the utility knife to score that circle and break the plastic. I'll show you how to do that later. And that should be all the tools you need. I also do recommend having a drill on hand. It makes it super easy to use these step drill bits. And that should be it. So this is the Lunchbox we're going to be building the new speaker into. And I find with projects like this, the best thing to start with is quick wins. So if I look at the back here, and the back of the finished speaker, we basically have the ports for the power input jack, the audio in jack, the LEDs, and the Bluetooth reset switch. So I think the first thing we'll start with is actually drilling out those holes back here. And the cool thing about this Lunchbox, I don't know if you could see that right in the center of the screen there, there's basically like a little circular divot. Those act as really good guides for placement of these holes. So let's start there first. Okay, so for this step, we're just going to use this jeweler's drill bit. And basically we're going to drill 6 pilot holes for the LEDs, the Bluetooth reset switch, the 3.5-inch audio jack, and the power jack. And to do that, it's actually pretty simple. So remember I was talking to you before, basically find those divots in the plastic and make sure when you're looking at this that you actually have it at the bottom of the case and not drill at the top. So remember, when this closes, it closes like this. So you're going to want to basically drill holes at the bottom here, which means basically right here. So with the drill bit, all you basically need to do is find the center of the hole you want to start, and then it just becomes a manual kind of process to kind of drill through like this. So let me drill all those holes, and then I'll show you when I'm done. All right, so I finished the pilot holes for the LEDs, which will go here, the power jack here, the audio in jack there, and the Bluetooth reset switch over there. So the next step basically is going to be using this step drill bit to drill these holes to the right diameter so that the various components fit directly inside. So I'm going to do that next. All right, so for actually drilling out the holes to the right diameter, to make it easier, I'm actually going to use a drill with the drill bit. Makes it really fast. Now, one question that comes up is, how do you know what diameter to actually drill the holes to? Well, one thing I found that actually makes it really simple is a lot of these parts come with basically washers and nuts. And the simplest way I found is to take the nut, actually put it onto the stepped drill bit to find out what specific diameter you're moving towards. So in this case, I kind of know exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 steps in, and that's the hole the size I need. And that's it. So yeah, let's get moving on this. I'm going to start with basically the LED holes. Perfect. And then from the inside, basically, you're just going to attach that with the washer, and then you're done. All right, so these are all the holes drilled. Everything's looking pretty good, lined up. So the next thing I think we're going to work on is actually drilling the holes to hold the bracket for where the Bluetooth and the battery board are going to be mounted. So let me show you what that's going to look like on the inside of the case next. So looking on the inside of the case of the previous build that I did, basically I have the Bluetooth board and the battery board mounted to the top of the Lunchbox. And I'm using these standoffs here to give some extra clearance, and particularly the clearance here allows me to get the power switch in that same location. So I'm going to do the same thing on the new build, and I'm using basically the same size standoffs. So the first step basically is getting the right placement for where the standoff should match to the top of the case, and then using this jeweler's drill bit to basically drill pilot holes that match directly up to the standoffs themselves. And then I'll use the step drill bit to basically widen the diameter of those holes just a little bit, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to start working on that next. Okay, so let's start with the Bluetooth board first. Now the things you're going to run into basically are, whoops, hold on, sorry. The things you're going to have to watch for are, in this particular Lunchbox, there's this kind of divot here that I think I'm going to keep because it doesn't affect anything. I think it adds some structure to the top. But my standoffs are going to have to go over that. And that should be lined up pretty closely there. And then the same thing for the Bluetooth board. Now, one thing that's going to happen because of this is there is basically a latch right here. And because of that latch, there's going to be no way for me to screw in basically 2 of the standoffs. That same thing happened in my other build, and it actually worked out just fine. So I'm only going to really drill 6 holes here, 3 on each side, and that should be enough to hold these in place. As far as how to do that, let's try something here. So basically, we'll start with one board. That feels like a pretty good placement for it. And you know, it's really just kind of eyeing it to where you think that that hole is going to be. So, for example, let's see. That feels probably about right there. And again, using the hand drill, you're basically just kind of hand drilling it in and getting a quick pilot in place to kind of start with. And it's just a little bit of trial and error of getting the right placement for it. Now there's probably a better way to do this. Again, I'm just kind of doing it as I go, but it has worked out before, so let's try it out. And just using that drill bit to kind of go right through. As you can see, I've actually gotten it directly into the hole there. So now I have one pilot drilled for the top standoff, and then my aim will be to do the same for the bottom. Should that fit? Perfect. Cool. So that's going to be kind of what it looks like on the top. So let's try to match that up inside. Make sure it does match up. Perfect. Cool. And now we're going to basically just use the screwdriver to get things set up. All right, so that's actually pretty good. That's in place right now. And should allow me to find the last place to put. Actually, before I do that, let's just double check. Does that still fit? Perfect. That'll still fit just fine. Cool. Okay. So let's do the last hole here. Okay. Cool. And now that's mounted on the inside, right there. So now I'll do the same thing with the battery board. And we're good to go. Cool. So now those are mounted at the top, pretty sturdy. And yeah, so now basically we have the holes drilled at the top to hold the boards in place, and we have the holes drilled at the back to place the ports. And the next thing I want to work on is actually getting the power switch port drilled up here, so we can mount that as well. Cool, step by step. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is placing the power switch at the top right here. Similar to the builds I did before, I have it basically placed right there. I won't be able to get it to the same position on this build because the handle here is a little wider, but ultimately what I'm looking to do is probably place it maybe right about there. So simple, same process as before. And the specific measurement is not really relevant here just because it's going to be more aesthetics than anything. But same concept, use the hand drill here and basically drill a pilot hole. So I want to try to find like halfway between here is probably about right there. And then we're just going to kind of, again, hand drill it in. And that creates a nice pilot hole. And then same concept with the stepped drill bit. This is the size of the washer for the actual thing. see what we measure up to. It's probably about 4 steps in, maybe about 4. And yeah, we're just gonna drill that in. So let's do that. Okay, clean that up a little bit. And then let's try this one more time. Perfect. So there you go, that's how that would fit. And the next thing to really test is that if I have this threaded in, do I still have enough clearance with this board here to mount it on the inside? And we're good. Yeah, all good. Sweet. All right, so now that we have the power switch built in, the next thing I'm going to do is drill the hole for the volume control. And like on the speaker I built before, I actually like the placement directly on the front, because then as you're kind of playing music, it's very easy to reach here and start changing things. So I'm going to find a place for it right here probably. And similar to the holes we drilled on the back, again, on the inside here, you have these divots as guides. So I know straight down the line here, that's center. So I'm basically going to try to find a point right here, halfway between these 2 points and directly below this point. And that should be where I drill it out. So I'm going to work on that next. All right, so same principle as before. Basically, and I already did this, so I'll show you now. Basically, I measured out the halfway distance between these 2 points, which is about right there, and just kind of made sure that I had a straight line from the center point here. And then I used the hand drill to kind of drill a pilot hole. Now, one other technique you could try that has worked for me is to not really mess up this prints too much. I basically are using the X-Acto knife here to just create a little bit more of a pilot hole and just kind of twisting it around to just get some cleaner cuts there. Now I have a little bit more of a hole to drill into. The next question, of course, is what is the diameter of this? So again, same thing. Just take off the nut here, or the washer, and test it on the drill. So this is about 6. And then yeah, same principle, just drill into, basically drill 6 down. Cool. Now basically you have your volume mounted, and that's it. Cool. All right. So the next thing we'll work on is likely going to be the most time-consuming part, which is mounting the speakers. And yeah, we'll work on that next. All right, so placement for the speakers is kind of the most challenging part of this build. Because I want to make sure the speakers are coming out the front where the sticker shows to give that aesthetic, I also need to make sure that I place them in a way where the art that kind of sells the piece is still showing through. So for example, I want to make sure the Voltron logo still displays here, and I want to give some kind of space between. So this actually feels pretty good placement for what I'm trying to shoot for on this build. Whereas you can see on the G.I. Joe, when I actually have the speakers mounted just a little bit higher up. So I think for this particular Lunchbox, I'm going to mount them just a little bit lower because I'd like the logo to show through here. Whereas if I had moved them kind of dead center, you basically cut that logo off. So something to keep in mind when you're building something like this out. Really look at the sticker that you're working with on the box and try to find what aesthetically works best. So in this case, I'm thinking like something like right there. Cool. So now that I had found basically where I wanted to place the speakers, I just used this Sharpie to kind of mark out exactly where the screw holes will be. And that actually gives me a good guide to where to center the cut for the center of the speaker itself. Okay, so similar process before, just taking the hand drill bit here and using the speakers as a guide, basically drilling out the holes where the screws will go for mounting. So now I have the 8 holes drilled for the screws to mount the speakers. And I can see I already started drawing the center points. I measured that before. Basically, it's equal distance between this point and this point, and equal distance between this point and this point. That's your center. So it becomes really easy to figure out where that is if you start with these holes first. Cool. So the next thing basically is to drill these holes a little up to the diameter they need to be. So these are going to be 832 screws, and that just happens to be basically the same diameter we have on this drill bit at, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 N. So same process as before. Let's get that to the right starting point. Actually, you know what? Let's do one thing before we do that. So remember how we did the volume knob? Use an X-Acto knife to widen those holes just a little bit. Gives you a little bit more of a pilot hole to drill into. It makes it so the hole doesn't shift on you, which is kind of what you're looking for. All right. It's a little messy, but that's okay, because again, you're going to have the screw here mounted directly on like that. So it should cover any discrepancy up pretty well. Okay, let's do the rest. All right. Perfect. Cool. Now let's test that the screws are lined up well. They should be. And boom, boom, boom. Good. Cool. And of course, this is not how it's going to be mounted, but this is a good way to test to make sure that the screws are lined up. Everything looks good. All right, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side now. So remember at the beginning of the video, I showed you I'd use masking tape to draw the circle. Basically, here's what I'm going to try. Again, I don't have a drill bit that is a size, so the best way I could probably make this work is like I did on my first build, is drill a pilot hole in the center, use the stepped drill that I have to create a little bit of a, a little bit more of a deep hole there, and then I'll use that to kind of score the plastic by hand using that utility knife, and score it out myself by hand. Now before I get started though, the first thing I need to check is to make sure that this masking tape is actually lined up to center right here. And the best way that I know to do that now, again using limited tools at home, is basically just to measure it. Use a ruler. I know my speaker is about 3 inches, so I'm going to basically measure the same distance there. And I'll draw a vertical line and a horizontal line at that same distance. And I'll use that cross to line up this to center, and then I'll draw that circle. All right, so I have the crosses drawn out, and you can see it lines up pretty well. So now the next step would basically be to draw a circle using the Sharpie inside there to get the actual diameter of the speaker, and do that for both sides. And once that's done, then I'll show you how to score it out with a utility knife. All right, so now you can see we have these circles drawn out and traced. And this next part is somewhat tedious, but it's versus going out and buying a circular bit that's around 3 inches, it works. So basically what you're gonna do, what I'm gonna do right now basically, is trace using this X-Acto knife. very, very gently trace the diameter, or slowly trace the diameter of the circle you drew. And the idea here basically is to create like a quick line that you'll use to score the plastic. You got to go very slowly. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pause here and take this out. All right, so back to it. Basically, like I said, we're just tracing this circle very slowly by hand. And this gives you a line that you could run the utility knife against to score it even deeper. All you're doing is just tracing the circle. So this will take some time. There are definitely faster ways to do this. Like I said, if you could find a circular drill bit at about 3 inches in diameter, that should go right through this and basically give you a perfect circle. If you don't have that on hand, like I don't, basically this works. The other thing you'll need to do though, once you finish this and actually broken the pieces off, is you're going to sand the inside of this to smooth it down a bit. But yeah, it's just a very slow, methodical process. Don't go too fast. So all you're doing is just tracing a circle. And the reason I go through it with the X-Acto knife first, so it makes it easier to go through it with the utility knife after. Okay, so that's all the way around. I have a nice little score line there. So the other thing that I'll point out is I actually drilled a hole straight down the center as well. And the reason I did that is there's a technique I learned on another build that I did once where I basically used the driller's drill bit here to create little holes across like these lines here. And what that does is it makes this easier to break. And so I'm going to do that technique later. And the reason why I have that circle there is it makes it easy for me to create these holes and then have like a fulcrum point to pull the plastic out. So yeah, that's basically it. So we'll get there in a second. Next, let's start scoring it for real with the actual utility knife. Again, same thing, be very gentle, very slow, because this is very sharp. But again, I have that line that I can dig into from the X-Acto knife. But this just takes some time to do. Again, very methodical. Watch your fingers, make sure your thumb is not in the path of the cut. Just take your time doing it. Again, all you're doing underneath here is you're basically scoring the plastic. So you're making the plastic more, it's going to make it easier for the plastic to bend behind the scenes. Just take your time. Okay, so I'm going to do that a few more times basically, around and around and around, and eventually it'll get scored enough to be able to break. Like I said, very time consuming, but it is a really simple way with just the basic tools you might have in home to do the same thing that it might take to buy a more expensive bit. So I'm going to do this off camera just to get it done, because it's just going to be tedious to watch me do the whole thing. And yeah, when I'm done, I'll come back and I'll show you basically how to break it off. Okay, so where am I at so far? So as I've been scoring around the circle and getting deeper and deeper, I've also started to, if you could see, score the crosses. Now that gives me basically a bend point. So you can see if I press down into here, actually, if I press down into there, you could see it's starting to bend at that score that I've done. So the basic idea is to continue to basically weaken this edge so that I can basically press in and automatically kind of pop out that piece. So I'm just going to continue to score here. But now that I have the center pieces scored as well as across, the actual bending in of this will be much easier. Okay, so I think I'm actually pretty close on one of these. So I'm going to actually try it on camera and see what it does. Basically, I'm going to press this piece in here from the center. And you can see, basically I'm getting the score line that I've done by hand right there. So there's our circle. Now again, that was hand scored with a utility knife. And the next step I have basically is to sand that down. And we actually should look pretty good. And these are the pieces basically that we broke off. So you could see structurally that's kind of how they were. Cool. I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, and then I'll mount the speakers and we'll see how it looks. All right, so I have the speakers mounted just to test how things would fit. Oops, I'm actually missing one screw here. Yeah, but things are looking pretty good. So I need to sand the edge around here just to soften that up a bit. But otherwise, I think we're kind of off to the races. Now the last thing I'll do, or the last thing we need to do, so we have, let's run through what we have. We have the volume knob mounted, the speakers mounted and placed and cut. On the inside, we have we drilled the holes to mount the Bluetooth board and the battery board up here. We need to mount those. We've mounted all the components in the back. So the last thing we'll need to do to finish this up is actually wire everything together. And that's going to require, for the speakers, we'll have to solder basically the speakers to speaker cables. And also need to solder the power jack to the power cable. Yeah, once we have that done, the speaker will be complete. So the other thing I really like about this project is the wiring is super easy. Now, this may look like a mess of wires, but the cool thing is most of the wires actually have their connectors already attached, and the board here makes it super easy to plug them in. So the only two things we're going to have to solder are going to be the speaker wires and the power jack. So taking a look closely at the board, we have the red LED plugged in here. This is the audio in jack, and that's followed by the green and the blue LEDs. And that's followed by the Bluetooth reset switch here. This is the cable to the volume knob. Underneath here, this wire basically here connects to the battery board. And then right next to it is the wire for the power switch. So the last thing we'll need to do is solder the speaker cables, which will plug directly into this port here, and then solder the power jack, which will plug into that port right there. And that's it. So I'm going to work on that next. Okay, so for the last part of this build, we're basically just going to connect the speakers to the speaker cable and this power jack to this power cable. And this is the only part of the build where you have to do some soldering or soldering. I can't ever figure out which is the right way to say that. Anyway, so basically the biggest complication here, I think, to figure out is where to attach the wires to. So on the power jack, basically the red wire is going to attach to this post right here on the right. And then the black wire is going to attach to the middle post right here. And that's basically it. The one thing that I did do is I stripped back this wire just a little bit to expose a little bit more of the wire. And I'm also going to add some heat shrink tubing to here so that when I connect the final wire to the post, basically it's going to sit kind of like that on top of it. Cool. So I'm going to do that now, and yeah, I'm going to speed this up. All right, so the power jack is all wired up. And you can see I covered the solder with these heat shrink tubing, and that's basically it. So now this is done, and we'll work on the speakers next. So I think these are hooked up the right way, positive and negative across the board. But I'm basically going to run a test with these to make sure that the speakers are correctly in phase, meaning when sound is playing, they're both moving in and out at the same time. If they're not in phase, the audio you're going to get out of the speakers is going to be a little distorted and sound like it's coming from behind you. So the next check basically is to hook all this up, run some test audio, and make sure that the wiring is correct. And if not, I'll show you a quick way to fix it. Cool, let's do that next. All right, so the speakers are hooked up and everything's actually working really well. So let's check this out. The volume knob works. It gets pretty loud though, so I'm not going to go too full volume. But yeah, everything is hooked up and playing nicely. So the last thing we'll need to do basically is mount all of this hardware inside of the case. And yeah, I'm going to do that next. And then we'll have a finished speaker. Hope you've been following along and that you're having a good time. Thanks so much. All right, so everything's built into the speaker now and it's actually fully done. So I'm charging up the battery right now with this power cable back here. And actually it should be charged pretty good. So let's unplug that and I'll show you basically how everything's set up. So again, on the back we have the LEDs, a power jack, an audio in jack, and a Bluetooth reset switch. On the top we have the power switch. And then on the front, obviously, the two speakers, stereo, and a volume wheel. And then on the inside, basically we have a battery and the Bluetooth board itself. And yeah, it actually goes together really nice. It has a pretty solid sound. So let's turn this on. Actually flip the switch here, and you'll see the LEDs kick on. So power and Bluetooth should come on in a second. And when it stops flashing, it means it's connected to my phone, which is good. And this LED is not on just because the power adapter is not plugged in. If I had that plugged in, that would be green to show that the device is charging. So now, let's actually try a song. All right. I won't go too loud because it actually gets pretty loud, but yeah. Volume works all the way down, then up as well. And basically now we have a finished speaker. Hope you had fun going along with me. I know it's a pretty long video, and I hope you have a fun time building your own. And obviously if you have any questions, just ask me in the comments. Thanks so much.